This video was brought to you by 89 hours of research, scripting, editing, and abject misery. I'm just letting you all know this in case you think that my video or delivery is underwhelming. But anyways, on with the show. China. An economic superpower, home to 1.4 billion people, and a country which has just extended its contract for a Formula 1 Grand Prix, held on the Shanghai International Circuit. The Chinese Grand Prix had been run from 2004 onwards up until you know what happened, which meant that it was off the calendar from 2020 to 2022. But a recent announcement has seen the Grand Prix return in 2023, and that's pretty much needed now since, for the first time ever, China will have their very own driver on the Formula 1 grid. It's great to finally have a Chinese driver on the grid, even if it did come at the expense of the son of God, and the best Aussie prospect since the rotary washing line, signing on with Alfa Romeo to partner Valtteri Bottas next year. This is probably as good a time as any to have a look at this dude. Let's have a look at Guanyu Zhou. Now, I'm sure some of you more informed viewers out there would like to point out that Zhou would not be China's first Formula 1 driver. Well, you're half right there. Zhou is not the first person from China to compete in a Formula 1 weekend. That was done back in 2012 by a driver called Ma Qinghua, a driver whose results make you think, okay, maybe Carmen Jordan wasn't so bad. Okay, maybe he wasn't that terrible, but nothing worthy of the free practice sessions that he had bought from 2012 to 2013, even if he did bring in an ungodly amount of money to help keep those teams afloat. I mean, hey, back in those times, HRT was selling underwear signed by Pedro de la Rosa just so they could pay the bills to get the Pirellis for the weekend. Desperate times from desperate teams called for very desperate measures. Other drivers like Hope and Tongue tested for Renault, and Yi Fi have been involved in academies, but in terms of proper Formula 1 weekends, this is where it ended for Chinese drivers. Until Zhou came along, who, say it with me people, started his career in karting. I swear these driver profile videos are becoming so formulaic, it's like watching a Marvel movie. After winning in the domestic scene throughout Shanghai and the rest of China, he travelled to South Yorkshire in the UK to further his karting ventures. His time there was decent enough, winning the Super 1 National Championship and Rotax Max Euro Challenge in 2013. And given the talent levels of the European field, whilst at the same time having to acclimatise to a whole new culture, way of living, and learning a whole new bloody language while still growing up, what he achieved in that time was plenty solid enough. But of course, he had his heart set on one championship and one championship only. And so to get there, he needed to progress to racing cars. I mean, duh. Starting out in Formula 4 with Prema Team in 2015, he undertook a part-time campaign in the ADAC Championship in Germany and a full-time campaign in the Italian series. And while the former provided a mixed array of results that ranged from podiums to Alessio Deletta, the Italian one was a little bit better. He took 3 wins that year and finished ahead of some acclaimed drivers such as David Beckman and Bobby Schwartzy, but he did finish behind his teammate Ralph Aaron. In fact, he finished over 100 points behind him. A fair cliff, but you can forgive that when you remember that Zhou was in his debut year of car racing. But if he found that year tricky, next year wasn't going to be much easier. Starting off the 2016 season, he took part in the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand. Racing with M2 competition, he was in a good enough team to go for the title. Only issue for him was that his teammates included Pedro Piquet, Artem Markelov, Jahan Daruvala, and Lando Norris. Zhou took a win at Hampton Downs and finished ahead of Markelov in the standings. Although Norris and Daruvala took the spoils in terms of accolades and points and all the other unimportant stuff, in general, Zhou lacked pace in the same way that F1 Twitter lacks wheel knowledge. Although it was all prep for the main season in Europe, where Zhou made the jump over to European Formula 3 with Motor Park. This championship was about as tough as they came. It was like the Junior Racing Series equivalent of Jason Momoa. For the rest of us, we just can't compete. His teammates that year were Joel Eriksson, Nico Kari, and Sergio Seta Camara. All very good drivers, and they kind of proved that by beating Zhou in the standings. A lot of them. In Zhou's defense, he did show promise throughout that year, but as always seems to be the problem with him, the results never really seem to come about, for whatever reason, which is super weird, I know. That season was dominated by Prema Team, so when Zhou signed up with him heading into 2017, you'd imagine everything would be fine and dandy, eh? Yeah, sure. It's probably a good time to mention that since 2014, Zhou had been a part of the Ferrari Driver Academy, and so the move to Prema was more natural than him simply turning up with a bundle of cash, telling everyone to cut their losses and just accept this date for the prom. His teammates that year would be Maximilian Gunter, Callum Ilott, and Mick Schumacher. And while he would get the upper hand on Mixter, he finished quite a way down on Gunter and Ilott. Zhou did notch up a few podiums and showed a fair amount of speed, but was just sort of nowhere near the others in terms of results. Even still, he stayed on with Prema for 2018, still paired up with Schumi, but now also joined by Ralph Aaron, Marcus Armstrong, and Bobby Schwartzy. That team was just one Callum Ilott away from being the 4 horsemen of the Ferrari Junior Apocalypse. He started off the season relatively well, actually extremely well, winning his first F3 race in the season opener in Po. His performances in the opening part of the year were pretty decent, getting pole at Zandvoort, and 5 podiums in the opening 4 rounds. And heading into the round at Spa, he was P3 in the standings, just 10 points behind championship leader Armstrong. But then it fell apart pretty damn badly, Spa being an unmitigated disaster, and for the next few rounds, he struggled to get on the podium. Meanwhile, Mick Schumacher had all of a sudden found the magic potion, or depending upon who you ask, engine, and even his other teammates were still finding podiums left, right and centre. Zhou meanwhile was kinda drowning. He finally broke through with a win at the final round in Hockenheim, but was still the lowest of all Prema drivers that year. It may sound a bit like I'm doom and glooming this guy, but honestly, the point I'm trying to get across is that while he's shown that he is quick behind the wheel, it didn't translate to results. And ultimately results kinda matter? I mean, yeah, Jai Courtney has put in a couple of good performances in his life, but that doesn't excuse the other films where he possesses the acting range of a dog on a rug. As well as not winning many accolades, Ferrari kicked him to the curb at the end of 2018, ending the 4-year partnership and kinda setting Zhou back a little bit. Still, armed with these 2 wins, Zhou graduated to Formula 2 for 2019, and he would sign up with the Renault Sport Academy for that year, also serving as a development driver for the Renault Formula 1 team, driving with UNI Virtuosi with Luca Giotto as his wingman. Rumours abound that Giotto was helping Zhou out with car setup and driver development. That could all be true, but Giotto did come in with a couple of years experience, so for him to beat Zhou in the standings was no real surprise. Zhou did collect a handful of podiums and had a decent outing all round, all things considered, if you ignore the enormous pace deficit in some of the rounds, but that said, it could have been worse. 2020 came with a modicum of promise. The Virtuosi cars were showing speed, and Zhou himself looked to be in decent form. Problem for him was that his new teammate Callum Ilott was about to have a year to remember, at least until a Saturday Ava in Bahrain. Zhou appeared to have the upper hand in the opening race in Spielberg. He took the pole and led the opening race comfortably before mechanical gremlins curtailed these efforts, while Ilott sailed through to win the race. That pace should have been a launch pad from which Zhou could build toward a solid championship campaign. And yeah, I'm talking about straight up fighting for the title here. Instead, while his teammate would fight for the title all the way to the death, Zhou kind of faded away and never really was in contention, never really had the pace of his teammate. And although he got his first F2 win at Sochi, Zhou finished P6 in the standings that year, around 50 points behind his teammate and behind a dude who a lot of people don't exactly rate highly. At this point, things didn't look too brilliant, it must be said. He was still hell-bent on getting into Formula 1, but those super license points are crucial for getting there, which is why you need to achieve them high results in a junior Formula car, which is also probably why he partook in the F3 Asia Series at the start of 2021 to help bring him closer to his ultimate goal. 2021 always seemed to be Zhou's make or break year for a campaign that really was Formula 1 or bust. Staying with Virtuosi for the last dance, he would be joined by Felipe Drugovich, who has proven to be a quick driver. But right from the outset, it appeared that whatever witchcraft Zhou pulled off in the off-season had worked, taking pole and winning the feature race at the season opener in Bahrain to pretty much start the season about as well as anyone could want. He won the first sprint race on the streets of Monaco too, setting the fastest lap in the feature race on his way to a top 5 finish. These results, coupled with a lot of the Formula 2 grid tripping over each other, meant that Zhou led the standings comfortably over Oscar Piastri and Théo Pourchaire. But what was needed from here was a good, consistent campaign. You wouldn't, for instance, want to walk away from any of these rounds with no points because you either completely drop it or overcook it. But yeah, he did that. Despite winning the feature race at Silverstone, Zhou had lost the lead in the championship to Pastry by the halfway mark of the season. His campaign at Monza was good. It was consistent. But then he spun out before the start of the Sochi race and kind of ended up back at square one again. And with Piastri winning the feature race that weekend, he enters the last 2 rounds in Jeddah and Abu Dhabi with a seemingly unassailable lead. And yet despite this, Zhou's dream of reaching Formula 1 was soon to be realised. He'd already partaken in an FP1 session at the Austrian Grand Prix in 2021 and was given the thumbs up from Fernando Alonso, who claimed that he was ready for the big time. Finally, on November 16th, Zhou was announced to drive for the Alfa Romeo Formula 1 team, driving alongside coffee connoisseur Valtteri Bottas for the 2022 season. Actually, the news pretty much broke a few days earlier after a Shanghai Alfa dealership broke the embargo, which was kind of, yeah. It seems no one could keep that secret, which is ironic given, you know. So the question on everyone's lips is, how will Valtteri Bottas cope now that he's not in a Mercedes? Oh yeah, and who the f is this guy? After having vaguely walked through the junior career of Zhou thus far, you can draw a fair few conclusions from it. So, does Guanyu Zhou deserve a Formula 1 drive? More specifically, does he deserve a Formula 1 drive over drivers such as Oscar Piastri? If your answer to that is yes, then I really don't know what to say other than your wheel knowledge might be lacking. Much like Max Verstappen's steering input in Brazil. That's not a crack at Zhou specifically, but at the system created by the current state of Formula 1. A lack of seats, coupled with the perilous financial situation for a few of these teams. Although, in saying that, at what point in the history of Formula 1 has there never been any pay drivers? Piastri's stint in the juniors has been remarkable, an ever-increasing array of accolades without much need for extra years or outside assistance. A driver who looks to have the key ingredients required to be successful in the top flight of motorsport. Zhou, meanwhile, how can I put this nicely? His junior career hasn't been as impressive as Piastri's. If I were to speak more candidly here, Zhou's junior career is almost reminiscent of Nicholas Latifi's. Somewhat decent results, showed good, albeit not brilliant speed. And then in their last year of junior Formula Racing, in Formula 2 ironically, they picked it up and had their best season to boot. Latifi entered into the F1 scene with almost no expectation around him. In fact, a lot of people thought he'd be a baby in water. But I said back then that we gotta give this dude a couple of years to prove his worth. You always need to give a driver a couple of years to prove themselves. Those 2 years are up, and while he's still down on George Russell, he's proven to be a competent, troubleless driver aside from that time where he tried to incite civil war in Canada. Based on that, we now go back to Zhou, and we have to ask ourselves, could he deliver the goods in Formula 1? He may very well do that, and we gotta give this dude the time of day. I said that his junior career wasn't as impressive as Piastri's, but that's a tough act to follow. The thing we have to keep in mind is that Zhou is a good pedaler. I'll relay the same shit that I said in that Latifi video. Do I think this dude is gonna set the F1 world alight? No. Could I be wrong about that? Yeah. Should we give this dude a chance? Absolutely. But for f***'s sake, Alpine, get this dude into a Formula 1 seat for 2023. Revel out. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you're awesome, and always remember, keep it respectful, be wholesome, don't be a menace, and as always, I'll see you all later.